Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service through a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. On this Wednesday, Groundhog Day, February 2nd, 2022. And as always, you want additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov. Point and click map shows continental U.S. along with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. Look how lit up. This is today's particular image as of this afternoon. Massive winter storm and frontal system affecting much of the lower 48 from Texas on up into the lower Great Lakes and Northeast. Heavy snow, ice storm warnings. Talked to my sister in Kentucky. They're going to get blasted with freezing rain. Not a good situation. But you can learn about that. Check up on family and friends. See what the weather's like at their location. Well, happy Groundhog Day, as the old saying goes. If the groundhog sees a shadow, spring's just around the corner, otherwise 6 weeks away, something like that. Doesn't matter in Alaska. Let the little guy sleep in another month or two. Well, low will be impacting the Gulf Coast and Panhandle as we head up into Thursday and Friday. And once that system kind of weakens and does its thing, we're going to see colder temperatures return across the north and then western side of the state later this weekend and in through a good chunk of next week. But there are still some indications we could see a bigger and brief warm-up again across south central areas toward Valentine's Day later the following weekend. So we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, we have a number of advisories and warnings, winter weather advisories in effect for the areas of the Yukon Flats back through the lower middle Yukon Valley for mainly wind chills to as cold as 50 below. We do have high wind warning there along the east side of Norton Sound. And also some wind chill advisories and wind advisories there, the western part of the Seward Peninsula into St. Lawrence. But more importantly, as we get down toward the south and west, we have a blizzard warning for the lower Kuskokwim basin or delta there with Bethel included, as we expect snow and wind to move in there tonight and tomorrow. Same thing for the southwest portion area around Dillingham has a winter weather advisory for snow and blowing snow. May have to include the western part of the Kenai. That will not be updated until about the time this show airs, so you want to check on that. And then we have winter storm warnings that are in effect tonight into Thursday afternoon, covering a good chunk of the Panhandle. Initially, some heavier snow likely up toward Haines, Skagway, Juneau, but it's going to mix with some rain, so it'll be a bit sloppier as you get down toward the central portion of the Panhandle. And lighter precipitation amounts are anticipated there over toward Hyder, east of Ketchikan. Well, here's satellite imagery, and we can see that there's an area of low pressure, the cloud cover enhancement there across the Bristol Bay, southwest part of the state, extending down in the North Pacific. Another curl in the clouds there north of Adak out there in the lower Bering. And then, as I said, this next low pressure system is going to be riding up out of the North Pacific to along the western Gulf Coast as we go through Thursday into Friday, and then eventually be located out along the north central Gulf by Friday afternoon. And that's going to bring the inclement weather there, especially to the southern half and southeast parts of the state. Here is what we have this afternoon. We have an area of low pressure that's lifting northward and within an occluded front extending out there into the Gulf. And as we go into tonight, that system just kind of does its thing. And yet another one, we have also a low out there toward the central Aleutians, while high pressure remains in place from eastern Russia across the north slope into the Canadian Arctic coast. And on Wednesday, we'll see the next low coming in up out of the North Pacific, south of the Alaska Peninsula, and that's going to be lifting northward, and that's going to provide the next round of precipitation as we head into Thursday, lingering into Friday, especially southern half of the state where the most inclement weather will be. Low temperatures Thursday morning are going to be above freezing in the outer areas of the Panhandle. Temperatures slowly rising, though, as we get into south central areas and coastal areas. Temperatures should get into the 40s there around Sitka, down toward Craig and Ketchikan, and we could see 42s at Kodiak, where a little warmer air comes in from the south and west. And then temperatures Friday morning, even in Anchorage, will be rising up through the 20s, and we should see readings over the weekend close to freezing, especially Friday afternoon from Anchorage and, say, Cordova, Valdez on off toward the coast areas. And coldest temperatures will be across the north and east central areas, where we'll see some 30s to near 40 below. Thursday afternoon, temperatures will remain below zero across the east and northeast portion of the state, though beginning to creep upward in the lower and starting to middle Yukon Valley. Friday morning lows again 20s, 30s below there in the far North Slope area, East Central area, Yukon Flats, 40-mile gold country. Friday afternoon temperatures do get above zero there, from around Galena west and southwestward. And then across the Alaska Peninsula, we see temperatures creeping up above freezing as that milder air with the low begins to spread to the northeast, heading toward the Kenai. And Thursday afternoon, we should get temperatures approaching freezing there at Homer, 42 at Kodiak, and readings around 40 there as we extend out along the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Friday morning lows still single digits as we get up toward the mid-upper Kuskokwim and up toward the upper portion of the lower and middle Yukon Valley. Afternoon temperatures, though, should get back close up above freezing across much of the Alaska Peninsula, extending out into the Aleutians. And looking at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, February 8th through the 12th, we're going to see these briefly milder temperatures, south central areas here this Friday, early Saturday, shifting eastward. We'll see the Panhandle milder as we get into next week, and colder conditions settling in across the north as we go from later this weekend and early next week, and they'll settle down into the west side of the state, though we do expect precipitation to average above normal, especially central areas along and just north of the Alaska Range.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for your flying weather, and if you have a flight planned for this late week, Thursday into Friday, the main weather feature is going to be an area of low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific. It's not especially big or strong, but the energy is going to kind of split. A portion of it's going to go up into the southeast Barren north of the Alaska Peninsula, and another piece is going to ride up through the western part of the Gulf and be located into the north central Gulf by Friday. And as a result, we expect IFR conditions to be expanding Thursday morning across the southeast portion of the Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, southwest coast, across Kodiak Island, eastern Kenai, into the southern Panhandle. And this area of moisture and precipitation will be lifting northward. We do expect the potential for some mixed precipitation, especially the outer portion of the Panhandle as we go through Thursday afternoon and evening. Could see some light freezing rain or sleet mixing in before changing to rain by Thursday evening or Thursday night, but a broad area of IFR conditions extending from St. Matthew to Nunavik Island, across the southwest through the northern Gulf and Panhandle on up to the eastern half and south of the Alaska Range, including the Copper River Basin. Friday morning, the IFR conditions run from west to east, generally from the central Bering through the southwest interior, along and just west of the Alaska Range, as well as, again, encompassing much of the southeast interior to along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle. And then Friday afternoon, we still see areas of IFR from the southwest coast, the lower Yukon Delta, across the middle Yukon River Basin, especially south of the Yukon River through the Alaska Range, down through the Copper River Basin, on over toward Yakutat, and then still much of the central and southern Panhandle. We also have an area covering much of the Alaska Peninsula and far eastern Aleutians. So past conditions on Thursday, we expect Anaktuvuk as well as Adigan Pass to remain VFR. Further north you go, a little better conditions thanks to high pressure that'll be along the northern portion of the state into far northwest Canada. As we go further south and west, as we encounter that moisture that is gradually lifting northward, we expect Lake Clark and Merrill to be in IFR conditions, and we will see Rainy Pass there become from MVFR to IFR. Same thing, Windy Pass will go from MVFR to IFR on Thursday as that moisture lifts further northward through the central Alaska Range. And then areas further east that include Isabel as well as Mentasta Pass, they're going to be stuck in the IFR conditions, and we expect areas of snow. And further south, that will extend down through the Copper River Basin. Further south and west, Tanita may see MVFR conditions in the morning, but they will become IFR, as will Portage Pass. Look for MVFR conditions becoming IFR, and that will be due to the fact as that moisture lifts through the northern Gulf Coast, it's going to be producing areas of snow in that location. And then further off toward the east, in the northern end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will become IFR as that moisture expands northward throughout the day on Thursday. Freezing levels do bump up a bit ahead of this low. We expect freezing levels as high as 4,000 feet in the center of the Alaska Peninsula to just south of Kodiak Island, rising further to 6,000 to 8,000 feet along the Gulf and North Pacific interface. Icing conditions will be greatest threat there along portions of the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, on up through the eastern Kenai, northern Gulf Coast, into the Panhandle between 3,000 and 12,000 feet. And looking at upper level winds, 30,000 feet, we do have northwesterly winds over 100 knots from the southeast interior across the Panhandle into British Columbia. Also a little max off there through the eastern Bering from the south to 100 knots there north of the eastern Aleutians. And as we drop down to mid-levels, we see more organized circulation there in the lower Bering with a broad area of 50 to over 70 knot winds in a cyclonic circulation. And then bringing it down to 3,000 feet, we see winds ahead of that low lifting out of the North Pacific on Wednesday morning, pushing winds of 45 to 55 knots into the Panhandle, a broad area of easterly winds, 60 knots there over the middle Yukon Valley into the Seward Peninsula, and then a broad area of winds out over the Bering Sea. But we expect areas of turbulence in the west from the Yukon River back through the Seward Peninsula, generally below 4,000 feet, and then also the Alaska Peninsula, the central Aleutians, and the Panhandle.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the terminus used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing, and some are holding their terminus point. But at Kenai Fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is nothing, is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, you know, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, or we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field, we can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
You know, when you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change the glacier systems, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Ailik Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, you know, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. And there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the AKwx Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell, as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes, which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle, and we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and checking the sea ice edge today. We have extensive ice there across the northern central Bering on up to along the southwest coast, and with winds out of the northeast, gale force northeasterly winds will cause that ice to push back toward the west and south here the next couple of days. So the stronger winds will be in place here, especially as we go through the day on Thursday. But looking at the panhandle first, we do have a light mix of some light freezing rain, freezing drizzle, that it's going to be changing over to primarily rain on Thursday. Look for southeasterly winds, the lower inner channels, 20-25 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet. Still northerly there up in the Lynn Canal with 4-foot waves. Outer coast, 30-knot winds, though 40-knot gales are possible there west of Sitka, southwest of Gustavus. Waves 10 to 12 feet. And then on Friday, the inner channels are going to see southeasterly winds 20 to 30 knots, waves 4 to 6 feet. But the outer coast will see 35 to 40 knot gales, central southern areas with waves in the 15 to near 20-foot range, turning more southerly once you get from Yakutat westward. Across the northwestern Gulf Coast, winds 40-knot east-northeast gales with winds as high as 50-knot storm force winds there at the mouth of Cook Inlet and just northeast of Kodiak, with waves of 14 to 16 feet there. Prince William Sound northeast winds 30 knots, waves 6 feet. And Friday winds do come down. We expect winds out over the open waters of the northwestern Gulf out of the south-southwest, 30 to 35 knots, waves in the 12-14 foot range. Prince William Sound winds will be southeasterly 20 knots, 3-footers. Lower Cook Inlet, southwest of Anchor Point down to the mouth, 20-knot northeasterly winds and waves around 4 or 5 feet. Kodiak Island on Thursday will see winds upwards to 40 knots from the northeast through Shelikof Strait, some waves 15, 16 feet. Generally 30-knot westerly winds to the south of the Alaska Peninsula on the North Pacific side. A little more mixed there with the ice in place in Bristol Bay, southwesterly 25 knots. North of Cold Bay, but those winds are going to be shifting on Friday to the northeast, 25 knots Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. And on the Pacific side of the peninsula, expect southwest winds 35 to 40 knot gales with waves of 20 to near 25 feet in the open waters. Going out here through the eastern Aleutians on Thursday, winds will generally be from the southwest 20 to 25 knots through the central and eastern Aleutians, turning more southerly to 25 knots west of Adak. And then on Friday, a mixed bag through the central Aleutians, 10-15 knots. Again, nothing too terribly substantial for this time of year. And then across the west coast, we expect pretty strong 35 to 45 knot gales out of the northeast. That's going to tend to push the ice further west and a bit southward. Though St. Paul, St. George looking at southwest winds 20 knots, waves about 8 feet. Friday's winds continue out the northeast over the ice, but coming down to 20 to 30 knots. And as we go up along the Arctic coast, winds generally out of the west at 5 to 10 knots, though they do accelerate and turn to the northeast through the lower Chukchi Sea to 30 knots and accelerate to 45 knot gales once you get south of the Bering Strait to the north side of Nunavik Island. On Friday, look for winds to generally be out of the southwest there along the Arctic coast, Prudhoe Bay to Utqiagvik, and then out of the north-northwest around 20 knots, lower Chukchi Sea, picking up out of the north-northeast to 30 knots there on the west side of the Seward Peninsula, and as we get on the north side of St. Lawrence. Well, the weather maps tonight and into the day, Thursday, show high pressure firmly entrenched over eastern Russia, and as we head into the eastern portion of the state up there along the north slope. A couple low pressures, one over the northern Gulf will be in the process of weakening, though it is producing some light freezing precipitation there across the Panhandle. That will be changing to all rain as a little milder air creeps northward. And a pretty good low cranked up there in the central Aleutians will begin to fill by Wednesday afternoon. We see, though, another low lifting out of the North Pacific there just south of the Alaska Peninsula. That feature is going to lift north-northeastward and split one piece of energy going into the southeast Bering Sea, another riding up toward Kodiak Island. That'll be the next main system that produces another round of precipitation along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, with some of that moisture also being pulled up further north into the southwest interior and along south of the Alaska Range, as high pressure remains entrenched from eastern Russia across the north slope into far northern Canada. So that does it for the show tonight, and thank you for watching. Be sure to join me again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.